you've got this notion that leadership's not a thing. Can you help me understand that a bit better, please?
Well, leadership is often referred to in the conversation circles that we have as something you do. It's like a tool. However, Tony and I in our practice and in our craft really refer to leadership as a way of being. It's something you bring to life, and you bring it to life in the way that you show up. And when we say show up, it sounds quite simple, but actually what we're talking about is very complex. It's really about the narrative and the language that we live in our heads and in our history that comes forth in the moment that we're choosing to do something as a leader or have a conversation as a leader. Those kinds of narratives bring to life a mood in us, and it all shows up in the way that we lead.
The other premise that we come from is that, in this notion of leadership's not a thing, is that we principally work with human beings in the roles of being a leader. So it's like if I'm an engineer and we agree that you're an engineer and I'm a consultant, and then you talk as an engineer and I talk as a consultant, there's going to be a mismatch. There's going to be something missing. But if we can agree to go, hey, be in a conversation as human to human around matters of being an engineer and matters of being a consultant, then we can create something different. It's a different kind of energy that we can produce between us. Because what we claim in our program, Liberated Leaders, is that leadership is a linguistic competency, meaning leadership is brought to life in the conversations and relationships the leader has with the teams and the stakeholders and the customers that make up their world. So in essence, that's what we mean by leadership is not a thing. And we see that many people get hung up on that they become too robotic, this whole notion of, we must be professional as leaders. Well, it's cold and disconnects from the human experience of what it is to be a leader of a team of people who are engaged and passionate about something that's important for them. And that's the domain of possibility. These spaces of conversation and relationship is where possibility happens. And that's what leaders do. And that's what our program's about. Everything that we do and say as a leader should be about, okay, I get it. I understand it. Now what's possible? And in this day of, or in this time, this era of disruption and change and uncertainty, if there's ever a time when we need to connect more as a human being to other human beings, it's now, because God knows we need help. Many leaders out there need help because they're trying to do what they typically have done traditionally and historically, and it's worked beautifully for them. But, we've got to ask the question, why isn't it working as well now? We need to really rethink how we've done it in the past and really begin to think about, well, what is the future-ready team that we need to take care of the concerns of our customers and ourselves in the future that's being created? And that we don't know. And we can't predict. But what we need to do is have a think about how we can, Paula mentioned before about way of being, how can we cultivate a way of being that is more agile, flexible, accepting of this fast-paced change, rather than being rigid, resentful, resistant, that helps nobody. So this is what we explore in our first move of Liberated Leaders.
What do you teach to leaders now in order to show up and lead?
Well,
I don't know that I would use the word teach.
I was going to say that.
It's the first thing I experienced. Right. It was we actually give them an experience through reflective practice of how they assess their going relative to what it is that they want to achieve. And that is often a deep dive into their own history and the story of themselves that they've crafted over time. And there's a reason that those people are in the room, and typically that's that something's not working for them. But one of the challenges we're noticing is that some leaders don't even know how to define what's not working. It's just that it's not working. They don't feel well. What they used to do in the past isn't working anymore. That they are in an unhelpful mood. It shows up like resignation. I don't know if I can continue to go on like this, or resentment. I'm angry about having to do this every day, or anxiety. I'm so fearful of what's about to happen next. I don't even know if I can show up tomorrow. So we encounter leaders mostly in that space. And what we help them do is uncover the story of themselves that has brought them to today, and to reveal behind that the concerns that they've been taking care of up to this point in their career and the standards that they've adopted somewhere along that pathway, and to have them really question as to whether or not the standards, the behaviors, the practices, and the recurrent narratives that they're telling themselves are going to help them get to the place that they want to go as a leader. So it's almost like a checkpoint and a reassessment of, hold on a second, how am I going here? And is what I've been and is how I've been doing it going to serve me in the future I want to create? You can't teach that, and it takes time. I would say that is the one lesson that we've been reflecting on more recently, is that about a year is just enough to really start to make progress. And then there's a reinvestment that every leader needs to make in continuing to reinvent themselves. And I think that that's what we're starting to learn is there's an unraveling process to start. There's a presencing process where we get that we're not helping ourselves create the future we want to. And then there's a time where we go, okay, this is it, game on. I'm going to start developing some new practices, some new habits, and I'm going to start learning how it is to cultivate a positive mood.
Mm. Yeah, and I can pick up on that too, is that, just recently we've been working with some wonderful leaders and leaders who are really open to being vulnerable around the space of being learners again. And yet we've worked with other leaders over the past few years who make a pretty solid declaration that they're not prepared to learn. And that comes about by when we're talking to them and their teams, when the leader will go, oh, well, this program isn't for me, it's for my executive team or for my operational team. And we go, well, if you're not prepared to be coached or not prepared to be a good learner, then we're out of here. Pretty well, because if the leader isn't going to be prepared to become a learner in this process of reinvention, because let's face it, what are we talking about when we're talking about cultural transformation or change in organisation? Again, we're not talking about a thing. We're talking about people within the organisation who are the organisation, making those changes necessary to embrace a very different future.
I just wrote down the word compassion, because when a leader's showing up saying that's not for me, and I'm not the one who needs to change, it's everybody else, the first thing I think about is what's really going on for that leader and what is the concern that they're taking care of, because most often we don't even realise that we're taking care of something very deep in what we get up to every day, even if we don't realize that, taking care of our identity in some way. And that the success formulas that have brought very successful leaders from their history to the point of now is probably not going to be the success formula for the future. Therefore, leaders recognize that they need to learn new skills and undertake new practices, and therefore they're not going to be the knower, the person that is the knowledge hub anymore. And that's quite a big fall if that's how you've identified yourself or created your identity. It's a big thing to say, you know what, I'm going to step off the top notch of master or expert in my domain. And we particularly talk about professional domains where we encounter very experienced technicians who may have somehow adopted during the course of their career the role of leader, but not necessarily built all of the skills and capabilities that enable them to enable their teams to be what their teams have to be for the future. And so it reveals a skills gap and a practice gap, and it can be absolutely terrifying because it rocks someone's world. So we understand it when leaders say, no, that's not for me. But actually that's the exact leader we should be working with, because behind that is a narrative. And if we can help reveal that narrative and help that leader understand that by holding on to that, they only cause their own suffering, if we can enable that as an insight, then that leader could be potentially the most extraordinary leader for their team, because they've known that old world. Now it's time to reinvent, upskill, bring everyone on the journey. But sometimes it can feel like a very difficult transition for people.
You also spoke about what are the stories and narratives that we're playing in our head. For example, that person who's the leader of their team and they're not willing to learn, or they don't think they need to learn, this is for the executives under me, narratives would they be telling themselves? And then how does that make them show up like that?
Wow.
Good question.
It's a great question. And I've got people flashing through my head. I actually have faces flashing through my head of those kinds of leaders. And it's not an unkind flashing. It's just flashes of, I know the people that come to mind immediately. I think the thing that they would be telling themselves is, this isn't for me. I know this already. This is for everybody else. It's not me that has the problem. This isn't the way I like to learn. So what we're talking about here, Jack, is a blindness. Now, whether it's contrived or whether it's genuine, there's a true blindness and a true opposition to learning when a leader shows up as not wanting to evolve themselves. And that can be a front. And if I dug behind the front, or if we dug behind the front, what you'd probably find is a space of deep vulnerability or fear or concern, or in the past, anger or disappointment. And that is the place where you can start to help the leader really shift, when you start to work more in that emotional domain behind the story. So when we say a story, it's not always overt. It can just feel like, I don't need to know that. It's covert. It's just, I know this already. And that can be a habitual way of thinking, especially if you're an expert, because guess what? Everyone knows that you know everything. So you think you know everything, and therefore there is no reason to learn. But in this age of digital disruption and with the pace of change that's happening, you can't afford to do that as a leader anymore. You must be able to reskill, upskill, and create a condition for your team to do the same. We were talking to a CEO earlier this morning, and we were talking about excessive hours. And I know that I sent that CEO an email on a Sunday afternoon, and within 10 minutes I had a response. And we were doing an experiment to see who was working, who would respond on what time. And we did the executive team experiment on a Sunday and Monday. What he was saying is, last night he left the office and the chief operating officer came in and apologised just before he left at 7 o'clock for going home early. And I said, well, you're still sitting there. And he said, well, today I'm going to ask them all to go home at 5 o'clock. And I said, are you going home at 5 o'clock? And I could just see this whole like dual thing going on, because he was wanting his team to work less hours, but he would work on a Sunday. So far, we've got some evidence of him doing this, as well as sending everyone else home but staying there. The reason they're there is because he's there.
Setting the standard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it was just this little moment where he went, oh, I just saw him, get it. You've got to go home at 5 o'clock too. And we said, are you going home at 5 o'clock? And what's interesting as a CEO is that no one else is helping you. It's a very lonely post, right? And Tony and I love coaching to that level. We kind of become an ally for them in some ways. But it's very difficult for people to have a conversation often with the CEO because they're the top dog. It's good to challenge that position because, look, my friend Daniel says the fish stinks from the head down. I'm not saying that this organisation is in trouble. What I'm saying is that culture comes from the very, very top of the organisation. And if you have a blindness there, that blindness trickles all the way through. So you can't drive a culture bottom up. It's both. It's bottom up and top down. And we've got deep experience of it has to be at the top.
I want to contribute to that too, but I want to go back about a minute or so. And it's around, leaders being great learners that we absolutely advocate for. In fact, it's foundational, we believe, for leaders to embrace that declaration. Sometimes when leaders can't lean into the space of being a learner, their identity is at stake. They've built a very, very solid career around what they know in terms of practices and skills and sensibilities. And, they've got the winning formula. But you see, this social era, or this era that we're working in now, is going to trip everybody up. Because it doesn't matter how good we were in the past, that doesn't define how well we need to be more agile and flexible in the future that's being created, because we see leaders up against some very, very complex complex problems and breakdowns and issues and concerns that, what we're labeling as complexity is different for every organization. And not all of us, and I don't know one person who can say, I'm all over what's going on in my business. I've got the answers for everything, and I know how to engage people at the same time. I'm not hearing that at all. Well, we're not. We're hearing something very different. We're hearing the moods of anxiety, resignation. What the heck do we do? There's so much going on. We're so tired. We're so fatigued. We've got so much on our plates. So, I really get it when leaders say that, oh God, learning, because it's just another thing we have to do. And yet, if they stop and think about the impact of not leaning into being a leader learner and the impact on their team and their customers, and then when that's revealed for them, they go, oh my God, okay, I can see what I need to do now. I can see what narrative needs to change. I can see how my mood has been impacting, the team and the rest of the organization. That's when magic can happen. That's when possibility can begin to flourish. The moment that leader has that insight, has that shift in what we call way of being, everything's open for change from that point forward.
Instead of showing up at anxiety and resignation, what's the best way for a CEO to show up for their company?
There's no precise thing how leaders should show up because we're all different, right? But one thing that we should be focused on is accepting what's going on. Really opening our eyes up and understanding the context in which work is happening in the workplace and what's going on for people. And really, even making requests of those people that they trust to go, hey, what do you see that's happening that I might not be seeing? Starting to get a deeper sense of what's going on and how people are impacted. Because, we see a lot of leaders who are out there, as Paula said, we were talking to a CEO today, but we talk with many, many leaders. But, what happens in the workplace, there's a connection from what happens in the workplace if people are overworked and anxious and resigned right back into the family unit. It's not just isolated to the workplace. We now know that it's more in the social space as well. So, it's really important these days for leaders particularly just to stop. Just to get off this crazy bus that many people are on and just stop and reflect for a moment. Hold on. How are my behaviors, how are my moods impacting those people around me? And, and if they can do that, then I think that there will be quite a profound shift even in that. And so when we're talking about way of being can be interpreted as the narratives that we have or the story that we have about what's happening now, the mood that produces, and how we show up. Paula spoke about that before. Now, how we show up, are we showing up as tired and fatigued and, at the end of our chain and resigned, so, hope is not possible? Or are we showing up something different that, people can get a sense of, hey, I'm following this person. I trust this person's intuition and, their leadership. It's taking us somewhere. So it's the way leaders show up in this domain in terms of how to navigate this complexity is instilling hope in people that it's going to be okay. Whatever we are up against, it'll be okay.
One thing that comes to mind when you say that, right, of showing up in a good mood is when I think about it, I can think back of 2 times when I've been in the ultimate mood. Like I feel good. I feel like I can crush anything. And then you can obviously think about the bad times in life where it's not so good and you're feeling down, depressed, anxious. Like in my head, like that's your way of being and showing up in its extremes. And obviously there's a spectrum, but you're always in some stage of that. You may not be on the ends of the Richter scales, but you're showing up in a way. And I suppose as a CEO or a leader of a team, like the more pressure you have on you, it's much easier to have that weight on you to show up on the worst side of, all those bad emotions and, the stress and everything that shows up. So yeah, I can really understand that of how you're showing up as a leader, but then also how do you show up at home? Like leadership is not a thing. That makes sense.
Yeah.
When you say that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think what's been interesting for me is just recently revealing the deep relationship between quality of thinking and emotions and moods. And that we become blind like a fish in water as to what our repetitive thinking patterns are and how deeply they affect our moods. And, for example, something happens, and in the past I've had the same thing happen. And as soon as I see that thing happen, I am instantly flung into anger or disappointment. And if that thing happens again, I'm flung into anger and disappointment, and I'm flung into anger and disappointment. Over time, that regular response becomes habituated and it becomes a mood, resentment and resignation. But we don't realize that we are the generator of the emotion in response to the provocation. We don't realize that we're creating that because we're in it so deeply. We're recreating it all the time. Something happens, or I've got a trigger in my business. I've seen that before. That's what happened in the past. That's what's going to happen in the future. I've seen that before. And we create these loops, and then we live into the loop. And I feel like the work that Tony and I do with leaders is revealing where we've crafted those loops. But the beautiful thing that's being revealed, I think, in our work is what it is to have a positive loop. Because for many leaders, they've been so entrenched in the narrative, and not just their personal narrative, the corporatized busyness is a good thing. I'm going to work long hours. Or you get on this terrible treadmill and you don't even realize that it's a negative treadmill. And then this evolves itself to resignation, resentment, anxiety in most cases. But there's this beautiful upside when we can say enough, stop, and we start to recognize that it's unhelpful, it's playing out at home, it doesn't just happen in the workplace, and you want to in some way transform how it is for you to be a leader, your experience of being a leader. It doesn't mean you need to walk away from the job, which is how it can feel at a point of crisis. It means accepting just where you're at and saying, you know what, satisfaction for what's happened in the past. And maybe relief that it's over if you're looking backwards. But looking forwards, this idea that there's excitement, that there's enthusiasm, that there's possibility, and that there's joy in the future. And I see that this is the pathway for where leaders need to be around innovation. Because when we think about our younger workforces that we work with, even our work, our team is a young team. We work with joy. We work with excitement. It is so great to go to work. Their moods, Sam's in there singing. Chloe was almost singing this morning. What a joy it is to go to work. And as you kind of move through decades of leadership, I think it drops off in terms of its mood portfolio. Our job is to go, hold on a minute. Let's get back in the game. And the conversation, we just had a conversation today with Hayley Meaden, who's our health coach, about how we accidentally get into these unhelpful practices that aren't just about the quality of our thinking. It's the quality of us not hydrating ourselves, us not eating well, us not sleeping well, not moving our bodies. And all of this contributes to unhelpful moods. All the research that we've looked up connects not having enough water and not nourishing ourselves with an unhelpful mood. And if our job is to help leaders make a migration from an unhelpful mood cycle to the moods of ambition and hope and wonder, which is where they need to be in the space of innovation. If you're going to lead these days, you must be there. Doesn't mean you won't go through the other places. It just means you must know how to get from the unhelpful moods to the more helpful moods. Then you're going to have to pay attention to reinvesting in your health and to get back on the health wagon. And Jack, when you mentioned your moods all the way down from, we're in a disastrous place, all the way up to this is it, I'm on fire. When I think about you and our coaching journey, I think about, I know when you're on fire because you've got your practices in place. And it's practice-based. If you're up out of bed at 4:45, I know that you're going to have a good day. And so do you. Yeah. But when you stop doing it, things nosedive, but you're catching yourself sooner.
Yes.
Like you definitely go, I'm heading from the top of the pops down. Catch yourself.
Well, I understand it now. That's
good.
The difference.
Okay.
That's
so
the difference. How
do you know to catch that? How can you catch it now?
Well, now I'm aware of it. Now I literally know what I need to do to have a good day. And when I'm doing the things that I say I'm going to do, nothing's wrong. Like I know that I'm all over it. And when I'm all over it, I feel good. When I'm not all over it, when I'm not doing the things I say I'm going to do, that's when I get put into a bad mood, essentially. But what you said before really intrigued me, where you were talking about what's the trigger.
And then there's a recurrent story that you get stuck in. You tell yourself a story straight away. So something happens and straight away you're making sense of that thing. Now that sense making becomes habituated. And we can't see that it's happening. It's just that we make the same sense over and over, day to day. And making sense of that in an emotion eventually evolves itself into a mood. So something happens, something happens, or something happens and I'm flung into anger and resentment. Something happens, here it is again. And at the end of the day, that just becomes a repeated cycle. We live with anger and resentment.
I know that when I'm in a bad mood or something's not right, that something's not right. But if I didn't learn that and I go 20 years down the track and I've been in a job or a company or whatever I've been doing, and if you don't know these things, how do you see it?
You often don't. That's what we refer to as our blindness. Unless there's a provocation, an intervention through a conversation where somebody says to you, hey, Jack, are you aware that when in those moments you do this? And you might say two things. No, I don't. Or you might say, oh, really? Tell me more about that. Because I don't see that. But what you're pointing to there is something that we as a practice get our leaders to practice. And that is sharing assessments or sharing judgments and opinions, our observations with other leaders to reveal the blindness that they're not seeing. Because as you say, how else are you going to see it? But you see, it's the greatest source of learning when it's not pointed out to you, because it's not a fact often. It's often what we call an assessment, just their point of view. But there could be something in that for you.
So what's the result, right? I understand sharing assessments. How does that show up for you in a workplace when you share assessments with other people?
Oh, I have a great story. So I have a coach and my coach lives in San Francisco. When you first meet him, he's terrifying. And some people are still terrified of him because he's so frank.
And honest.
Yes, his name's not Frank. And we went to San Francisco just last week and we asked for a coaching appointment. And I, halfway through I was sorry I'd asked, but I don't think I was entirely sorry I asked, because he shared an assessment with me about his interpretation of my behaviors and how I showed up to him. Now, you only do that because you care about someone, and as a coach, you only do it because you care about their development. Tony's and my way of sharing assessments is far kinder than our coaches. However, he shared an assessment with me that I was arrogant and that I was ignorant. And to everyone that I've said that to so far, they go, what? Because they don't experience me as those two things. But instead of wholly rejecting the assessment that he shared, I decided that there must be some reason that he's sharing that with me, because he cares about my growth. And I'm going to just sit back and think about what he's thinking about me in order to share that. So I sat around for a week. I had 3 days off to reflect about why he considers me arrogant. And what I figured out is that I've enrolled in an advanced course with him because Tony's doing the same course. And I hadn't even thought that I needed to do some undergraduate courses before going to do the advanced course. And I never thought of starting there. I just thought I'll go straight into the advanced course. And I was thinking that maybe he considered that arrogant. And I was thinking, I could see how he could see that that was arrogant. But then also I consulted with a group of guys from all around the world that I have as my learning support group. And we had a phone call, and a 75-year-old Chilean man said, I can tell you why he said that. And I said, well, why did he say that? And he said, because you don't give him permission to teach you. And it was just like the sky lit up for me. And it's true. I don't always agree with the way he teaches. Therefore, I perceive that his method isn't what I need. Therefore, that's arrogance. And I couldn't even see that in myself. But it was so worthwhile just sitting there going, oh, what's in this? What is in this? It could be an insult to everyone else, but for me, I'm there to learn. And it was such a profound learning. And the ignorance that he refers to is me being a little bit too busy in the business to be scanning the world and what I need to learn from the world. And he knows for me that if I start to read the world more, that I can be more powerful as a coach. And so he's helping me learn to be a better coach. But I had to learn to listen to the thing that was very, very provocative. So that is the power of an assessment. It has revealed for me a world that I couldn't see. And if no one had said that to me, I don't, first of all, no one else really saw that, but I believe it. I believe that there's something in it, and that I'm going to benefit as a coach from having such provocation and being able to stay with it until I find something in it.
Since those moments where the assessment was shared with you, what's changed for you?
Well, I definitely feel a lot more peaceful. I mean, if you can be with someone that's mildly petrifying while they share an assessment that most people would never want to hear and not react, then I think you can deal with most things. So I also feel that I don't have to fight anymore, because maybe I was busy hiding that story. Yeah. I don't know, that's just an idea, but I've definitely been much more in the flow of things and able to share with the team some of my core concerns and dilemmas. But what's been good about that is that the team's helping solve that, not me. So it's just a more open space of innovation inside the team, and even not resisting planning everything and getting it done a certain way. Just go with the flow, see what happens, which is not where I've come from historically. So I think I'm on an accelerated learning journey that's mirroring the one we take our leaders through. However, it's really good to know how much it hurts. It hurt. I did cry at the time he shared it, in front of his wife, in front of his daughter. And, here we are in the lounge room in San Francisco, and he says, get her a tissue. Sometimes an experience like that is just what you need.
Paula, I think you're pointing towards what I'm listening to there is, and bringing it back into the leadership space and the learning spaces when, in learning there are always teachers. Teachers not so much in the traditional sense of I'm going to teach you something, but more in the sense of I'm going to offer you something that might reveal something for you. And I'll never forget a quote from a mentor of mine, a man who I deeply admire, Humberto Maturana, who shared that learning happens when the student takes the hand of the teacher. And learning doesn't happen when you don't take the hand. And so I think, bringing it back into the domain of learning and our foundations program at Liberated Leaders is that we create those conditions of safety and deep, deep care where we can have those conversations that really matter, but more importantly, reveal our histories so that we can transform our futures.
Yeah. Could I share another story? Just because I'm so provoked by that. We don't share assessments like our coach shares with us. We ask permission, and it's usually we would say, and we would coach people to always ask permission before sharing one. A couple of years ago, I had a coachee that I would say nicknamed Motormouth. Honestly, just spoke and spoke and spoke and spoke about the same old stuff. And honestly, as soon as he started talking, you could see the whole group just go, oh, here we go. We're in for a monologue.
Know a few of those.
Exactly, right? You know a few of those, right? And so as a coach, there's always a time where you choose to share the assessment. However, one of the things that we do inside our leadership program is we set our leaders up with an activity where they're asked to go and speak with certain people in their team and to make a request of them to undertake an interview where they're only allowed to ask questions. And the questions are intended to provoke the person asking the question, and the person asking the question cannot defend, refute. They can only ask the question, and they just have to listen to the answers. that was a very insightful experience for this particular coachee, because he got some feedback, but I still felt that his team were walking on eggshells because he was the power broker. It's very difficult to say to your boss, you just don't listen. And because you don't listen, I don't want to tell you anything because you're always busy telling me about your version of things. So in our coaching session, I asked if I could share the assessment. And I shared it straight down the barrel, almost like that. And I played for him what I saw happen in the group when he started to talk, how long those monologues could be, and that they were frequently focused on what he did well and what other people didn't do well, and how that came across to the group. And it was difficult for him to hear. However, he knew that I was doing it from a space of care. And I do believe that that was a transforming time for this particular coachee. It took a few months until we were in the right space to do it. But when someone cares enough to deliver that well, then it can totally rock and change your world. If you are in a reporting structure where that's happening above you, it's often hard to deliver it. So you might be looking for some feedback from peers or other people in your horizontal networks that might be able to help you see what you can't see about yourself, which is relating back to your other question. How do you know that you're stuck in one of these places? You don't. And so if you were able to take something from this conversation, is go and start asking people a series of questions about how they perceive you. What's working in the way that you're leading them at the moment, and what's not working well? What's a particular habit that tends to distress or impact them as a performer? And how does it impact them? And can you share some more about that? Because I'd really like to understand it. Where else do you see this happening? So any questions that you can start to ask to get a read on yourself in the world would be a good way for you as a leader to start revealing your unhelpful habits and patterns.
So there's a few things I'm hearing here. There's the notion of sharing assessments, and this is in a team environment, sharing assessments with other people in your team, receiving assessments. If you're hearing an assessment from somebody that is provoking you, how do you take that on and actually listen to it?
Yeah.
And then also, whilst sharing assessments, you can obviously do it in a good mood, or you could do it in a really shit mood, which wouldn't give you the desired outcome.
Okay, so I want to interact with that question first off by saying is that this is an advanced skill to do it well. It's not something that we advocate for. Just go and have this conversation, go and, share an assessment, with how you're feeling or what you're observing about somebody else, because if there's no way of being work involved, it can be used as a weapon, and weapons hurt.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, the mood could be wrong. So it could be, the right conversation in the wrong mood. Therefore, it's the wrong conversation.
Can we play it out, Tone, quickly, just so everyone gets a sense of that?
Sure.
So, Tony, I have an assessment.
I'd like to hear it.
The way that you spoke to the CEO this morning was completely out of line.
Well, I'm listening to that as an assessment. It could be grounded or ungrounded, and it's your assessment. And I give you authority to have that assessment about it.
So I shared that in the mood of resentment. How are you feeling right about now?
Yeah, a little bit pushed into a corner with it. It's coming across as that it's a fact, not an observation or a perspective.
Yeah, and that's using it as a weapon, Jack.
And so, this is why we say with caution and with training and practice around sharing assessments. I'd like to share another story about a team that we were working with, where we did do a lot of way of being work and built this team up over a period of 3 months to be able to share assessments within the team context. Because as we know that life as a team, particularly as a senior leadership team, can be at times volatile in terms of if you don't have the skills to be able to share your concerns and grievances with people, then it can get very edgy, and often people won't have those conversations. So we gear teams to have those conversations. So we're at the final couple of weeks of working with this team for 3 months, and we've done extensive work on preparing them for having and sharing assessments in public with each other. And anyway, one of the guys who was on the team hadn't actually completed a number of the activities that we had asked them to complete. And anyway, so when it got back to the team, I was asking him, so what happened about that? He says, oh, well, I got busy and, this happened and that happened. I've gone, okay, flick it over to the team. Okay, team, what do you say about that? Well, anyway, one guy came straight out of the blocks and said, well, I've got an assessment about that. And anyway, he went in and did an absolutely magnificent job in sharing the assessment that didn't appreciate him not meeting his commitments because it reflects poorly on the team. And what are you going to do about it next to clean that up? It was so powerful, but not provocative, that he's gone, oh my God, I can now realize what I've done and how I've impacted the team. I'm so sorry. So there was a beautiful apology there. Mm-hmm. But I guarantee that guy will continue to deliver when there's team commitments from that point forward. So it's done in a particular way with a certain large amount of care, but also practice and technique to do that. And that's what our first move in our foundation program is all about, starting to work with people to build trust, to understand moods, to understand the narrative that they're living in, particularly those that don't really work for them, may have worked at some part of their life, may not be working well for them in the context of leadership now. Help them understand us or ourselves as a human being, begin to understand that in some small way. So that's really the first move of our foundations program, which really drops people into a big inquiry about themselves and their history and their behaviours, their moods, their existential moods, their existential, stories that they've been telling them about themselves, and really asking them, hey, it's got you to here so beautifully, but is it going to get you to the next period of your life? And so that's the space of transformation.
So what it makes me think of is, at the moment we are working with two different teams, and one's a team that's been together for a long time with some newcomers, and one is a brand new team. And it doesn't take a new team very long to start to have stories or judgments about each other, and for things to start to fall apart when the pressure comes on. And for both teams, we have sat with everyone one-on-one and had a conversation, and then brought the team back together to share here's what you say about each other. Now,
sharing assessments.
Well, they share assessments with us.
Right.
First, one-on-one with us. And then we put it all together, and then we play back, here's the story you're saying when you're talking to us, but it's the story you can't share with each other yet. And what I love about the idea of each leader embarking on a journey alongside the other leaders in their own team is that the team adopts a common way to be able to have what used to seem like impossible conversations, because they have a shared language and they have a way to say, hey, is it a fact, or is it an assessment or a story? What's going on behind that? What standard of yours am I not meeting when I don't do that thing? So that they can cut right through what can feel like something being offensive or a non-discussable into everything's up for discussion here. It's the way that we discuss it. What's interesting is when you sometimes share back that view that's shared with Tony and I to start, it's very provocative and people think, I could never talk about that. But honestly, 3 months after the revealing of the personal narrative for each person and bringing the shared language together as a team, they can begin to talk about almost anything with each other, and really then get on with the business for the organisation that they're in, rather than the business of opposing and fighting with each other and having views and judgments and all the messy parts of leadership.
I think a good way to describe that is, cultivating emotional fortitude, so that those conversations can be had.
Yeah. And I think that if a senior executive team cannot talk about tough stuff and share the toughest of tough stuff with each other, they're not set for disruption, because that's the tough stuff. If you're busy with internal arguments, fights, disappointments, disagreements, misunderstandings, then you're giving your energy that needs to be devoted to the competitive space out there away. It actually needs to be devoted out there into the people that you're leading to service and support what's going on in a disrupted and fast-moving and complex environment, not with this infighting.
Well, I like that saying is that how can you be in competition with your competitors when we're competing against ourselves as a team?
You know, it's not unusual though, right?
No,
so it's the endless horizon for leadership practice because it requires you to overcome something in yourself first. It's not about, let's use this model to correct that fault. It's not an engineering system. It's so braided in history and culture and norms that to get into that stuff requires a bit of digging around. Yes. And not everyone's up for that journey. However, when a leader in an organization declares we're going to do it, then sometimes you've just got to say yes.
For the sake of what? Why would we want to share an assessment with somebody, particularly when we care? But the other side of that, Jack, is that to build trust. You know, to build trust and to restore trust when trust is broken between, you know, really important relationships and teams.
Like, how does sharing an assessment build trust?
Well, if I'm not going to share a concern that I have about, say, you, Jack, that happened last week, and I'm going, no, I'm not going to share that. That's going to play out in our relationship. I'm not going to share information with you. I probably won't coordinate. I probably won't invite you out for drinks on Friday afternoon. You know, that's how it plays out. I'll marginalize you. I'll cut you out of certain things because, you know, I'm not prepared. I'm concealing something from you. And in a high-functioning team, in this age of disruption, when we need everybody in the game, we say that these conversations are crucial for the dynamic of the team.
I think trust is a tricky one because it's one word. And that if I asked you what trust was and I asked 5 other people what trust was, you'd all give us a different answer. And if you've got all of those different answers, then you're talking about something that's quite amorphous. So what you usually need is a way to think about it and then talk about it. And in our practice, we offer 4 ways to think about trust, or 4 assessments that really make up trust. One of those is all about whether the person seems sincere, whether their words align with what you think they're, you know, are they on board? Are they really honest with what they're say they're going to do? The second is whether they're competent. Can they do what they say they're going to do? The third is whether they're reliable, which is when they've done it in the past, have they done what they said they were going to do according to time and standard? And lastly, whether they're involved or whether they care about what's important for you. And it's really interesting when we start to work with this as a framework to assess the trustworthiness of someone, that leaders can then typically identify that, actually, it's only 2 of those things that are at stake for me. It's just that I don't think that they're sincere or involved. They're quite competent and quite reliable, or vice versa. They are sincere, they're not competent, they're not reliable, but they're involved. And when you can start to break it down into, it gets simpler. The conversation becomes accessible because suddenly I can talk about sincerity and involvement and I don't need to deal with competence and reliability or vice versa. And then I can just talk about the facts of the situation and the concern I have around it. And then you can really start to move ahead. It was interesting. We were working with a group on Wednesday this week, and this exact thing was playing out. And there was someone in the room that had an assessment of a long-term employee in an organization that had gone through a significant growth. They just opened up a new office, and this long-term employee was not delivering on what they knew they had to do. And the person in the room was mighty pissed off with them. And the more we got into it and we said, well, what's at stake here? Is it that they're not, any of the 4? Is it sincerity, competence, reliability, or involvement? What she identified was that the person was competent, was probably sincere and involved, but historically not reliable, not delivering on the promises. So really isolated it down to historically over the last few months since we've moved real estate, you're not delivering. And this is the impact on the end customer, and this is the impact on me. And once she started to structure that up, she realized that this conversation was actually a caring conversation. It wasn't a criticizing conversation. It was a conversation for care. And what came to the attention of the person that was about to have the conversation was, I wonder what's happening in the world of the person that can't be relied on to make commitments anymore. And what's missing for that person that has them not be able to take care of those things that they used to be able to take care of before. And all of a sudden you had a human issue in the room, not a blame issue in the room. And it was all about going back into the assessments and going back and analyzing what about trust is at stake and how do I break it down and create a way to have a conversation with another human so that as soon as we start talking, there's some shared understanding. At the end of the day, she set forth to do that.
And this also goes back to in a relationship, like if you're not sharing assessments with, your partner, they might do something that pisses you off and you don't share that, what's that space creating between the two people?
Yeah.
So it makes perfect sense when you say leadership's not a thing. It's a linguistic skill, Dad, which you said at the start of this conversation.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, correct in our tradition anyway. It might not be in others, but it's deeply meaningful for us. And that space in the relationship we call a mood. where concerns and assessments aren't shared.
Yeah, because you feel that, don't you?
Well, that space between is a mood. You're pissing me off in some way. You're doing something that it's not meeting my standard. And that space is created between us where there's no trust, in whatever aspect of trust that is.
I will feel you.
Yeah, exactly. It creates something.
Away. Yeah. I will feel the reverberation of your narrative that you have about me.
Yeah, that's right. It'll show up.
And not only that, if Paula was in the room too, she would be going, what the heck is going on here? And we wouldn't even have to say anything. So that's what we refer to when we talk about mood.
Inside a team, we call it a mood manager. Someone that walks into the room and everyone's like, where are they at? Before they decide how the team meeting is going to go, because they're the person who's dominant. When they're in a great mood and a great day, it's a great day for everyone. And when they're in a terrible one, everyone's got their head down. And so when we start to talk, we call it human speak. People go, I know that. And then the question for leaders is, when are you that? Because you don't realize typically if you are the top dog or if you've got the most power, that you are that. Because people are tap dancing because you've got the power. And so there are some questions, Jack, that you can ask people within your remit. And it's not just about the questions, about the space you create of safety for people to share that with you. Because if you've been blind to potentially an unhelpful mood that you've created as a leader, some people might not be as forthcoming with direct feedback about that. You could counterbalance it. You could say, over the last few months, what have I been doing as a leader that's working well for you? And then counterbalance it. And what are some of the things that I do in our interactions day to day that don't necessarily create a space where you're flourishing? And then follow the trail. When would I do that? Could you give me an example of that? And when that happened, what happened for you? And what was the impact? And what happened for other people around that? Because, it's beautiful if people come into this conversation and share examples of it. We have been in this situation where we've revealed it for each other and had our team come and tell us what's not working. The ultimate breakthrough. I mean, it's so courageous when someone wants to tell you, but when you can create a space of safety where you ask and you'll say, I'm listening without judgment, I'm listening to learn, then you can create a different kind of possibility for yourself as a leader and therefore the team.
If you don't create that condition for people to be able to share things with you, they're going to share it with you regardless, hopefully, but it'll most likely be when some shit goes down.
Yes.
Something will happen and that's the moment where they share it, not in a nice, controlled, safe environment.
Or they share it with somebody else.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't share it with you because you don't give them the opportunity or the conditions of safety to do that.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. If someone walks in and is in a shit mood, like you're not going to share something, negative about them or share something with them that affects you. You're definitely not going to do that.
We don't often see the moods that we're in because we are the moods. We are a mood.
Yeah.
And so it's like a fish in water. Fish doesn't see the water until somebody taps the fish on the fin and says, hey, have you realised that you're swimming in water?
Okay, so people know what a bad mood is. Someone says that person's in a bad mood, sure. But what is that? Like what moods are there?
I think that, what a bad mood is when we close down to possibility. We resist something. We don't want to let control go. We want to control and predict rather than go with the flow. So, a bad mood can be, like when we get angry that things haven't gone the way we want them to, or we get anxious, fearful, frightened, panic, over controlling when people don't do what we want them to. And, when we can see possibility, but we deny ourselves of possibility and we lose hope, and we get into that dark, stormy mood where we're just feeling down. And when you walk into, somebody in those heavy moods of resignation, you just about feel your energy being taken from you because it's so no hope, it's dark and stormy. So other heavier moods that we often see in organizations, of course, that's not all of the moods, but they're some of the moods, heavier moods that we see, but it's mostly around opposing and resisting what's going on in their environment. And that could be including themselves, not accepting themselves.
So I found it hard to understand the heavier moods when you said that. But one thing that comes to mind, an easy mood for me to understand and go, oh, okay, that makes sense to me, is when somebody does something that irritates you and you just get put in that bad mood, and it can stay with you. Now, one example would be that happened to me the other day was I was listening to my audiobook and then my partner came in and she started talking and I was so involved with this audiobook and I was just like, and I just got irritated. I pressed play and I was like, yep. And it just instantly put me in a bad mood. And that showed up and then it went sour because I was in a bad mood and I was frustrated. So like what went on there?
So you were opposing just what was happening in the moment because, you get two choices. I accept darling partner walking in and just wanting to have a conversation, pause, put it aside. Or I'm opposing going, I don't want this to happen right now. This isn't the right time. It produces an emotion. And if we get hooked into that regularly, then it predisposes us to be in a mood. So what Tony was talking about before was the idea of us opposing what's happened or what is happening, producing the mood of resentment. However, if we can learn to accept just what's happening, and particularly in these times of disruption where we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, we can't predict what's going to happen, think about what's going on our planet, think about the bushfires this week. Continuing to oppose what's happened can only produce resentment. But learning to accept, and there's a real key distinction with acceptance, and it is that you do not have to like it. But at some level that by continuing to oppose it, you are going to cause yourself suffering. So it doesn't mean that you have to like that your partner has walked in and disrupted your experience of the audiobook, but continuing to invest in not liking it, that can play a mood out for many, many hours. And then you have a fight and then you don't eat dinner together or however else that plays out. And you get a choice though. You could go, line in the sand. I don't like that. I can't listen to it right now, but here you are, darling. Let's have a conversation.
So my mood was resentment.
Sounds like it.
Resenting that she's interrupting
just a little.
My story.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Temporary.
And another mood of anxiety is if I asked you, Jack, what is it that you are concerned about next week? Have you got anything that's coming up your way that you're fearing which way it might go or concerned about which way it might go? That might be around your own competence to deal with a client or...
Yeah, there's one client that causes a bit of anxiety.
Right.
Not anxiety, but just angst, like not going to know what's going to happen,
Okay, so hear that? I don't know what's going to happen. So the moment that we project into the future, think about our future in terms of, oh my God, I don't think that's going to go so well. And that, as you said, is going to produce a mood of anxiety and concern because what needs to happen in that? Like if it goes well, what's going to be taken care of for you?
Safety.
Right.
Like safety. Everything's okay. And we're on track still.
We're on track. So the concern is it's really important that for this client and us is to be on track with each other.
Mm.
Yeah. And then there's a concern, but what if it doesn't happen?
Mm.
What if we're not on track after this meeting?
Mm.
So that can generate what we call the mood of anxiety.
Mm.
And in the way that moods operate in our nervous system is that you're already living that meeting. You're already creating it in your thinking, in your narrative. And so you might even walk into that meeting worrying and concerned and anxious about what's going to happen. So how would it be if you let that go and go, well, let's see what happens in the meeting, because it might go that way and it might not. You know, I might be investing a lot of time in worrying for no purpose, for no cause, because it could go really well.
Mm.
So what if you were able to now switch your inner story, your narrative, to go, well, let's wait and see how that meeting goes. What's different?
If I'm not worrying and being anxious over it, I could then put more time and effort into it, essentially, like leading up to it. If I'm not worrying about it and I go, well, all right, it is what it is, but I'm going to double down on the things that I can focus on to improve the outcome.
Right. And is that available to you while you're worrying about it?
Not nearly as much. No.
There is the space of possibility.
Mm. So what other moods are there? We've talked about resentment, anxiety, like a bad mood.
Another unhelpful one is resignation.
Mm.
And it shows up when you're opposing possibility. And it's a creeper, this one. It's overt where, you know, you see someone at work who walks around with his shoulders hunched, and you just, as soon as you look at them, you know that there's no hope, that they don't carry hope in their body. And resignation appears when we oppose what's possible. And it sounds like we could try that, but we tried that before and it never worked. There's a kind of script to resignation. It could show up, you know, think about our conversations when you've tried something and you've fallen back, and you've tried something and you've fallen back, and I'm never going to get there. Mm. That's it. I'm just not good at keeping commitments. That's it. And you give up. Mm. And you don't give up because you don't care. You just give up because you've got a nice evidence stream and good enough history to reinforce the old thinking habit that has you go, that's it. This is just how it's going to be. And it's interesting. I think I grew up in that environment, and it's a provocative mood for me to engage with. However, the opposite of that is acceptance of possibility. And in that, we create a beautiful mood called ambition. And it's the move to drive forward. We can do this. Let's give it a go. Here we are in a podcast suite. Let's give it a go and jump on a plane to Queensland. Make it happen. Bring Sam with us. Get Jack with his shirt on. All those things, right? See, but this is the mood of ambition. Let's just do it. Let's give it a go. Let's have a crack. And this is the one that sails you forward. And if we went in and had a look at anyone that's done anything big on the planet, this mood would be there. It might be coupled with something else, and there might be some unhelpful ones that are just alongside. However, this mood will be there. It's the mood to drive forward. So they're the big three that we look at, you know, the big.
Yeah, they are the big three, you know, looking at resentment, resignation and anxiety as those bad moods or negative moods. And then the more constructive moods or the opposite moods are acceptance, which is the most powerfully beautiful mood, which is access to love, serenity, peace, you know, those sorts of moods. Compassion, which includes self-compassion. And then resignation is hope, as Paula said, possibility, and then also an ambition, and then anxiety. Then the flip side of that is wonder. So, but that's a whole other conversation around moods. We could talk for 2 days on moods and how they're constructed, and the language that generates the mood, the behaviours that flow from the moods, and then also how we show up in each mood. And then the impact of those moods on teams, families, ourselves, communities, and so forth.
Tony, the thing that I've just become aware of in the last little while, working with you and working with our crew in San Francisco, mood is something you can cultivate, and that it doesn't matter what happens around you, you can still cultivate a constructive mood. I think that is so amazing. I still think it's so amazing. It doesn't matter what happens around you. You can still cultivate a constructive mood. You can have a more constructive interpretation. You can live in relative peace no matter what's happening around you. It's a choice. I don't think I ever understood that. Despite teaching my whole life, I think I understand it at some kind of biological level now. I understand it at a place of, I have wonder about the idea of that. And it's mostly sitting in a class of, on average, I would say the class is 65 years old. Older people that have gone through their transitions in life and career, beginning to want to find peace. And I feel kind of lucky to be a younger person in that crew, to go, wow, that's amazing. We should share this. If there's a way to find peace and to enjoy more of life, and we could find a way to share those steps with people, that's good work. That's our work. And it's great work. We had graduation last year of our third program. It was so phenomenal to listen to what each leader had done over the course of a year to change their life. It's the most amazing gift to watch someone invest time and energy in unraveling their story and putting themselves back together and go, that's it, I feel different. And I'm going to keep doing this because I can be a better human and a better leader. And I'm invested in being the best version of myself in this lifetime because that's what I've got. So.
And that journey comes from, how am I showing up? Not in general in life. What mood am I in? Am I generally in a bad mood?
What mood am I cultivating?
Well, before you can understand what mood you're cultivating, it's, well, what mood am I in?
Yeah.
How am I showing up? How do I want to be showing up? What conversations do I have to have with other people? Firstly, to identify how I'm showing up to the world. And then it's a journey of going, all right, well, I understand the habits that I've been in and the stories that I'm telling myself. If something happens, I'm instantly get thrown into a mood. It's happened before. It will happen again. Understand that, flip it, and then be in a place of peace and in a good mood all the time.
Well,
well, I don't think we're never ever going to be in a good mood all the time. You know, in the drift of life, we find ourselves in situations that produce or throw us into those bad moods, into those negative moods. And, you know, that's beautifully human. It's our ability to navigate in those moments from those heavier negative moods, because there's possibility that exists in them as well. You know, it's not an app that we've taken on board to have negative and positive, you know, moods. Is that, you know, we've evolved with this reverberation as our body, as our nervous system connects with the environment. You know, it's producing these moods for a reason, because it opens and closes us to possibility. But it's knowing how to work with our body, knowing the language of our nervous system. And, you know, the moment that we oppose something, it's going to throw up a negative mood. The moment that we accept and go with the flow of that, we don't have to like it, but it engages our body in a different kind of mood, more open mood. So we're engaged in the flow of life. And, you know, often we're not taught that. In conventional education, we're not taught that. We teach that. We offer that.
I don't know where else teaches this. You know, like where would you go to learn this stuff?
Well, through us, but also the ontological approach to transformation, coaching and transformation. You can learn this as an approach. It doesn't belong to the domain of ontology. It belongs to the domain of being human, which is ontology. It's a weird little twist there, but it's a phenomena of being human. That I remember a mentor of mine saying is that not only, you know, are we, if we were a musical instrument, the instrument that sings in terms of voices and languages, and, you know, but we're also the instrument. But, you know, do we really know how to play our instrument well? And if in this time of disruption, if there's ever a time where we need to know ourselves better, you know, to understand how We produce and generate different kinds of moods for different situations. And as leaders, for the whole sake of engaging people to produce new interpretations and possibilities for our customers, it's now. Because we know that what we were taught in the past about leadership may not be working for us now and into the future. We need a whole new different way of interpreting what leadership is. And if we're not going to understand how human beings function, move and operate, then I think that we're not going to get it. Many leaders are going to remain managers. And we don't need more managers. We need more leaders. We need more leaders to lead people through this change and disruption, because it's not going to change. Change is the constant. Digital platforms and technology is making sure of that. So, we're onto that. We're on the wave of that. And that's why we're edgy. That's why we design these conversations and practices to help people desensitize to conversations that might perturb them. But like Paula shared in her example of sharing an assessment, is that it's revealed possibilities for her that she could never have seen herself. Because we live in the social space as a human being. We're not individuals. And through that social space, through relationships and conversations, we transform ourselves. And isn't that beautiful?
That is really beautiful. Through conversations and relationships, we transform ourselves.
And empower other people to transform as well. If you're navigating around a team, other people are going to see that.
That's what leadership is about. It's not just about, producing results. It's not just about that. It is about that, but how are results produced? Through human engagement and humans coordinating action together.
Well, I think that's a lovely time to wrap up. But before we do, can you just share a little bit about your program? What is it? What do you do? What is it that you're teaching people to do?
Our foundations program at Liberated Leaders is a 10-month program. We typically take 25 people on at a time. We're boutique. It's a boutique learning experience where we help people reinterpret who they think they are to create possibilities beyond what they can see themselves for the sake of producing new interpretations for their teams and for their customers. And that includes the acquisition of new skills and practices and sensibilities. It includes really learning how to be with other people, particularly in those moments where we don't want to be with other people. The coordination of action, really learning to be with people in the way that we work together in organizations to produce something of value for our customers. And the sharing of assessments, which is something that we practice a lot of in our program, again, to desensitize people from their history so that they can be in any conversation in a great mood and still engage that person in a way that produces some sort of possibility at the end of it. And then introducing people then to a more futuristic approach to leadership, which is the leader coach. So not being that go-to hub, not being the knowledge holder, which was part of the industrial era kind of leadership / management. It's where we're transforming knowledge into know-how. We introduce people to 3 very specific, powerful coaching orientations that are around reflective practice, around self-coaching, building trust, and situational coaching. Because coaching can happen anywhere, anytime, with permission and with space.
We do dig deeply into habits and behaviors, and practices and skills are built. I think there's more than 40 that we build across the foundations program, and that is preceded by a one-dayer for people to put their toe in the water. It's called the Leadership Accelerator. We've done 6 of those this year, and it has been not one of them has been the same. I love that we've got the same curricula, but not one of them has been the same because we work off the group, we work with the group. And I think that personifies foundations as well, the 10-month program. The way that we do the learning is different. So we have day-long events about every 6 to 7 weeks during the course of 10 months, followed by one-on-one coaching where you get to really reflect on, how does this apply to me? How does this show up for me as a leader? What's being revealed to me, and what is the orientation I have to that. In addition, you get put with a little tribe of 5 or 6 people called a learning support group, and they become your posse. They become the people you learn with all the way through the program. They become the people you go to reflect with, and you have 10 conversations with them across the course of 10 months. And then we also support the learning with an online platform and then with 10 webinars as well. And we've just changed the flavour of our webinars. We write about 70 or 80% of our program every year, and then we leave 20% open because we've got to keep track with what's going on in our worldly context. And you would probably know that. It looks different year to year. But that's part of the joy for us, is that we never want our learning to suffer the fate of other kinds of learning, which is it's redundant and it's not relevant. We want it to always be relevant. So that is the journey for the learners.
Who's it for?
Senior leaders, already successful leaders, executives, CEOs often find their ways to the room. Entrepreneurs, people that are growing, rapidly growing businesses, just getting new teams, not sure how to run a team, people that are really invested as business owners in getting more efficiency and effectiveness inside their organization. I promise you, if you're a business owner, that there's something you can't see about yourself, and we would love to reveal that with you. And then also, like, I guess there's 2 kinds of leaders, but we call one of the profiles that we really love having in our room the young guns, and it's the guys and girls that are already going really well in their career, and it's a bit of a tune-up to make sure that they go really well for the next part of their career, so that they don't accidentally fall into the unhelpful moods or into arrogance about so much success so soon. Now, the other thing is that we blend our groups, so it's government, private, not-for-profit, entrepreneur. And we try and make sure there's one of each in the learning support group, because we want to disrupt the thinking of our learners. We don't want it to be, oh, I'm doing this program with people just like me. That's not us. We don't want that. That's not the world we live in. So we want pluralism and rich diversity in the room. 72-year-olds and 25-year-olds, all races, creeds, genders, welcome to this room. The more diverse, the better.
It's interesting that, once people have graduated from our foundation program, we have a nurture program that we engage people in, and we also have a series of masterclasses that we keep the community engaged in online learning, particularly around subject matters that they think that's very important for them in this contemporary world. So we've got one coming up very shortly, which is around conversational practices and really mastering, particularly facilitating very tough conversations in workplaces, how to constitute a team. What that means is, how do we get shared commitment, behaviours and practices to ensure the success and ongoing success of a team.
Facilitated dialogues.
Yep, facilitated
and how to constitute a team, how to build a team. Some people don't know how to build a team because they've been busy running the business. They've never been taught how to build a team. What are the agreements of a team? What are the behaviours of the team? So we have some teams coming along to this to have an adventure together for a few days, which is going to be great. But
so it's always fun when you get an executive team along.
Ah, yes. And where do people find you online?
www.liberatedleaders.com.au.
And social channels?
At Liberated Leaders for Instagram and Facebook. And you can find us Liberated Leaders on LinkedIn. They're our preferred channels at the moment. That's where we're having our conversation. Also, all of the feedback you can provide about what was interesting or not so interesting about this, we would love to hear it, because we declare ourselves ongoing and lifelong learners. We are happy to be beginners here.
Amen. Okay.
What a wonderful conversation.
Was. Thank you. Well done, everybody. How was it?
Beautiful.